Welcome back to the wonderful adventures of Dillard Taunt and the Identity Crisis Gang. The first thing you're sure to notice is that my audio is no longer terrible. I actually switched up to a microphone meant for recording, and wow, is the difference immediate. Today, Dillard's adventure starts by finding his old teacher, the one who was leading that seminar on how to make friends and influence people. Eager to help his former teacher, he rushes over. But something isn't right. Dillard feels drawn to his teacher, and not in an appropriate manner. It doesn't take long for him to realize that this is actually a horrible abuse of power coming from his former instructor, and any goodwill he had for the creature is quickly diminished. With that sorted out, it's time to resume our journey and pick up our next companion, Asterion. And while things may get off to a relatively rocky start with Asterion, Dillard has now become a master of de-escalation at this point. And after a very brief exchange of pleasantries, Asterion is fully on board.
But maybe sticking with the herd isn't a bad idea.
Our next top priority is to get our warlock, Will, to join the party. To do that, we're going to head straight for the Emerald Grove and trigger the Goblin invasion. And thus, the Blade of the Frontiers makes himself known. And more importantly, we get the opportunity to recruit Karlach.
And suffer its sting.
We want to start the battle off from the boulder in the back that gives us high ground. This lets us start in melee range to their archers, and also gives us the high ground advantage when we start making ranged attacks at the enemies. Not like it felt and made a tremendous difference. It's pretty obvious at this point that only having one level in each class in tactician mode is going to be more of a challenge than I initially thought. But that's okay. That just meant that I would actually have to play tactically, and I still plan on adhering to my promise of not using any cheese to win these fights. Another important thing to keep in mind, especially at these earlier levels, is to not get too good to use syndrome with your spell slots. The reason that we're bogarting so much food and camp supplies is so we can long rest whenever we need to, and there are actually very few story quests that are tied to the amount of long rests that you take. And it's important to remember that your enemy's positioning is just as important to your own, so make sure you're making use of those shove tactics to get people where you need them to be. And while I wouldn't say it was quick, we did eventually clean up the goblin horde.
That was the last of them. Inside! All of you! More may follow!
Then we have a quick loot, some more conflict resolution, and a quick stop by the store to unload and restock, and we're back into the Grove proper.
Better friends than the ones.
After that, it's only a couple of quick words before we have Will joining our party, and he's going to tell us exactly how to get to our final party member that we care about, Karlach.
But we haven't sprouted any tentacles. Not yet, anyway.
Now it's time to follow up on our girlfriend's quest, finding her creche. While Lae'zel's methods of diplomacy might be a little bit rough around the edges, they are definitely effective.
Is this monster with you?
And seeing as how we had miraculously encountered another person with racist tendencies towards the Gith, I was inclined to help her out. But don't worry, Dillard would definitely step in if things got too messy.
The map. Show me.
And just like that, we had our first lead. And I was finally able to get some approval rating back up from her, as she has disapproved of pretty much all of my decisions up until this point. But you know, a relationship doesn't have its ups and downs. During our exploration of the Grove, we run into the nicest old lady who's willing to help us out with our little problem. Provided, of course, that we're willing to go back to her place so she can have a better look. Seems reasonable enough. We buy what very few potions we have, in this case a potion of Hill Giant Strength, that'll definitely come in handy later, and then we are on our merry way. While we are in the grove, we're going to talk to as many people as possible and gather as much information as possible and loot as many things as possible. And if we do this all good and proper, we should be able to hit level 3 without having any more combat before we even leave this place. From there, we save a goblin using our silver tongue, and this little act of altruism seems to be enough to convince Gale that we are a trustworthy and endearing individual, and he shares his most important secret with us. To which Dillard says, "No problem, man. What's a couple of magic items between friends?" After that, we break out our new goblin friend in the hopes that she will be able to introduce us to the goblin camp leaders, and we might be able to solve everything diplomatically with as little bloodshed as possible. Which of course means our journey to free her immediately starts with copious amounts of bloodshed. So I'm trying to decide between either editing down the combat, as I have been, or speeding it up. Either way, I know that the combat and talking over it isn't the most engaging part of the video, so let me know what you think in the comments below. As you can see here, we had a bit of a time fighting 3 whole goblins, as we kept repeatedly going down and having to get each other back up. Lae'zel really proved herself as the MVP here, tracking down and assassinating every last goblin. Now that Saza was free, she was sure to put in a good word for us with her bosses and get us into that goblin camp peaceably. Back to the druid camp, we successfully noticed that there's something strange about this specific ox. I'm sure it's nothing, and definitely won't come up again later.
This creature isn't what it appears to be.
2 parents are denied entry into the inner circle of the grove, as their daughter has been arrested for stealing a precious idol from the druids. Now Dillard, of course, doesn't think theft is okay, but if she's just a child, then we're more than willing to go negotiate on her behalf. And boy, are we glad we did. It looks like these druids have a very drastic method of doing the good cop, bad cop situation.
I'm sorry.
This is madness, Korga.
Luckily, it's De-Escalation Man to the rescue, and with my bardic knowledge of lore and secrets, and thank God for some guidance, we're able to talk them out of murdering an innocent child, which Lae'zel disapproves of. Again. After that, we spoke with the healer, whose main point was to tell us that they can't actually help us. But they did have something very interesting on their desk. And while Dillard is against stealing, he's even more against getting caught. And given how difficult this run is, we are going to need every single advantage we can get. Now, the keen-eyed among you may have already noticed that we have the ability to level up, which is great. But, just like the last video, we aren't going to actually pull the trigger on it until we get our full party, and that means recruiting Karlach. Just a couple more things to do before we head out. First, we gotta make peace with this squirrel to get a hyena ear. These things are going to be as precious as gold to us, since they are the primary ingredient for making speed potions, which are going to be super helpful down the line. After doing that, I noticed for actually the first time that there was a bugbear that was hiding himself up on a cliff. So I decided to make sure we took care of that before we left too. We add Will to our party so we know where to go for Karlach, and then we are on our way. But not before we encounter some goblins who have taken over a dilapidated town that is in our path. Luckily, once again, Dillard's silver tongue of persuasiveness is able to convince them that we are in fact not a threat, and we should be able to pass by unharmed. We didn't even have to use the Mark of the Absolute for this one, and that's good, because apparently we already used it, and I don't remember where. But that might also point out to the more observant among you that we have in fact not long rested since the very first one that we took. And while I'm not going to be squeamish about using spells, I am going to be very squeamish about when and where to take long rests until I'm sure that our supplies are sufficiently stockpiled. While on the way, we also meet a devilishly handsome fellow, who is kind enough to offer to remove our tadpole for us, and even throws in a free meal to boot.
Middle of somewhere.
So, even after his grand reveal as a devil, I'm more than happy to take his offer for help to get rid of the tadpole. And he berates me for it, and doesn't even get rid of the tadpole. I guess that's what they mean when they say you should never trust devils. Well, this is an important lesson that Dillard is not going to soon forget.
Exhaust every possibility until none are left.
After we made it back home, it was time to take on some hyenas and gnolls, which, as I stated before, are great for us, so we want to make sure to harvest all of these little buggers after we finish them off. And considering how tired everyone was and that Will was still at level 1, this encounter actually went spectacularly.
Vile beasts. Nothing good is born from a corpse.
One very brief negotiation with Will later, and Karlach was on board.
Listen to sense now. I don't want this to end badly for either of us.
And now what you've all been waiting for, the level ups. We'll start off with Dillard himself, who we went with the Warlock with the Archfey Pact. We want all those crowd control things like Fear and Charm that are going to scale up with us regardless of the level of the class. For Shadowheart, you might be surprised to see that we actually went with Rogue for her, and this is because we want to get expertise in her wisdom-based abilities, like Perception and Insight. For Lae'zel, I actually found that the best next class for her was going to be Cleric, and specifically the War Domain. This way she could continue to take extra attacks as bonus actions, which would really help make up for that lack of a level 5 extra attack. I also gave her Bahamut as her god, because I think it'd be good for her to have a little bit of a positive influence in her life. With Will, we went with the Bard and Paladin combo to keep him effective on the front and back lines. We got the Oath of the Ancient so he could provide some extra healing and get that proficiency with medium armor, which is undoubtedly best in the game. Astarion got the Ranger Monk treatment to capitalize on his high dexterity, increase his AC, and damage. And unsurprisingly, Karlach got exactly the same treatment as Lae'zel with the War Cleric and Fighter class. Again, I really struggled with Gale since it's hard to make the intelligence work. In the end, I decided the Cleric with the Knowledge Domain to get him expertise in some of his other skills that he can use. And that marks the end of our journey from level 2 to level 3. This is only going to get harder as we get higher up in level. I've already recorded some of the next episode, and I've already started to have to pull some pretty insane tactics off to win some of the tougher fights. I hope you'll stick around, and if there's anything that you want to see, then let me know in the comments. I'd be happy to accommodate. Thanks a bunch, and I'll see you next time.